Welcome back to the Bring Our Troops Home podcast. If you've been with us for a while, thank you for sticking around. We did take a couple of weeks off after wrapping up the Dick Cheney series, partly to reset after a heavy run of episodes, partly to get through the holidays, and frankly, partly because January involves some unavoidable travel. But we're back now, and frankly, we're back at exactly the right time because this is when our organization does its best work. If you're new here, welcome. You found us at a moment when things are actually beginning to move and pick up. You see, Bring Our Troops Home exists for one simple reason: to restore constitutional limits on war and to bring the National Guard home from undeclared conflicts. And the way that we do that is by passing Defend the Guard legislation in every state in the country. Right now, state legislatures are back in session. And that means that our team is fully engaged. And this is not a slow season for us. This is the thick of it. If you want to learn more or to support the work, you can visit bringourtroopshome.us and click the donate link, or go directly to defendtheguard.us and you can contribute there. Everything we do, every state effort, every hearing, every bill is driven by grassroots support. And that matters more right now than it will at any other time in the political calendar. Because there's a reason this time of year feels different in American politics, even if most Americans can't quite put their finger on why. It's not just that there's election noise or that we're in the slow time after a national election. It's not just another outrage cycle. It's actually pressure building right now, structural pressure, the kind that only shows up when the calendar aligns just right. See, right now across the country, every state legislature is in session. And at the same time, many of those same states are heading straight into primary election season. Those two things overlap. It's not an accident. And it creates a window of leverage that simply does not exist at other points in the year. This is when laws are being written, when laws are being amended, when bills are being advanced, or they're being quietly killed. It's also when the very same lawmakers are preparing to face voters who will decide whether or not they get to keep their job. That overlap matters, and this is when we apply our pressure the best, because this is the moment when elected officials are voting in public and campaigning quietly and privately, when their rhetoric has to coexist with the real voting records, when activists can connect actions taken in committee rooms directly to consequences at the ballot box. This is the one time of year when we have more influence, we have more power, and we have more leverage than at any other point in the political cycle. And folks, it's not in Washington, D.C. That's the first lie that we need to get out of our heads. We've been conditioned to believe only what we see on Fox News and CNN and MS Now and all the other garbage networks. We've been conditioned to believe that politics only matters at the federal level, that Congress is where power lives, that unless you're influencing the president or Washington, D.C., you're wasting your time. But the truth is, Washington is the least responsive part of the entire system by design. Let's talk about why. The average member of the U.S. House of Representatives represents roughly 750,000 people. That's a staggering number. That means that one congressman is supposed to represent more people that live in some entire states. Now ask yourself a simple question. How accessible is someone who represents 750,000 people to me? The answer is obvious. They're not. They're not accessible at all. You can write a letter. You can make a phone call. You can show up at their office. You can go online and pound your chest on social media. But the odds are that your individual voice doesn't move the needle at all. In fact, your efforts are vanishingly small, believe it or not. It's not cynicism. I'm not trying to criticize you. It's just math, folks. And the U.S. Senate, it's even worse. 2 senators represent entire states, millions of people, entire regions, entire economies, entire media markets. And they are insulated by scale, by staff, by donors, and by distance. And that insulation is why Washington feels so unresponsive to the average American. It's not because people don't care. It's because the structure itself filters out pressure before it ever reaches the decision makers. Now, let's contrast that just a little bit with state politics. A typical state representative might represent 20,000 to 60,000 people, sometimes fewer. A state senator might represent the same amount or as much as 100 to 150,000 people. Those are orders of magnitude smaller than the United States federal government. That difference kind of changes everything. You just got to think about it a little bit. State legislators, they live in your community. They attend the same events that you do. They're kids. They go to the same school as your kids. They shop where you shop. They go to church where you go to church. And right now, while they're actively voting in legislative session, they're also thinking about whether they get to survive the next election. And that's where accountability actually exists. You see, James Madison, he warned that the powers of the federal government would be few and defined, while the powers of the states and the people would be numerous and indefinite. That wasn't philosophical optimism, folks. That's a safeguard. That's a feature of the system. The founders understood scale. They understood that representation only works when representatives are close enough to feel pressure from the people. But over time, we've abandoned that structure in practice, even if it still exists on paper, on PBS, I'm just a bill, all the things we were taught in school. But we've actually centralized power upward. We've treated state politics like a sideshow, and then we've wondered why Washington stopped listening to us. But power didn't disappear. It just migrated. And it migrated away from places where regular people still have leverage. But here's the part the political class doesn't want you to focus on. That migration can be reversed, at least partially. And this is the moment when it happens. Right now, a state representative cannot hide. Every committee vote is recorded. Every floor vote is public. Every decision becomes part of their campaign record. And because primaries are approaching, these records matter in a way that they don't during the general election season. This is when incumbents start running to the right, suddenly rediscovering principles that they haven't mentioned in years, suddenly talking about the Constitution, suddenly sounding like grassroots conservatives again. Not because they've had a change of heart, but because they know that primaries are where they are vulnerable. For most of the year, politics is managed. It's careful. It's safe. Donors set boundaries. Leadership sets minimal expectations. And politicians learn exactly how far they can drift without any consequences. But primary season, it disrupts the equilibrium. Every base pays attention. Their activists show up. And the cost of betrayal is infinitely higher for politicians. And this is when we can say that you voted in a way in the session, you now have to explain it in the election. This is when we can tie the legislative action directly to the electoral accountability. And this is also when local party involvement becomes incredibly powerful. County committees matter right now. Precinct positions matter right now. Delegate slots, they matter right now. And state conventions for your party, they matter right now. They're not ceremonial roles. They're actual levers of influence. State party platforms are written by people who actually show up. Delegates decide what the party officially stands for. And when activists engage seriously at that level, politicians, they lose their favorite excuse, which is to pretend that the base wants something different than it actually does. This is how issues that terrify the establishment gain traction. Ideas that limit undeclared wars, ideas that reassert state authority, ideas that protect rights without asking for federal permission, ideas that reflect what people want, not what donors are comfortable with. These ideas don't need Washington's blessings. They need a state house. They need guts in the state house. They need committee votes. They need citizens who understand where pressure actually works. See, Alexander Hamilton, he warned that centralized power naturally expands unless powers are checked. The states were meant to be that check, not in theory, but in practice through citizen participation. And right now, that participation matters more than it will at any other time in the calendar year. Legislatures are meeting right now. Bills are moving right now. Votes are being cast right now. And primaries, they're right around the corner. That combination, folks, that makes people really nervous. You can see it in the sudden outreach from incumbents who normally ignore grassroots activists. You can hear it in the tone shift. You can see it in the fundraising desperation. The donor class understands this moment better than most voters do. They know that money alone can't erase a bad vote when activists bring the receipts. They know that records created during session can become a weapon during a primary. And that is why they are trying to get ahead of it. That is why you see sudden repositioning, sudden praise, sudden concern for unity, sudden appeals to voters they usually treat as nothing more than an afterthought. They know this is the danger zone. Because if citizens connect legislative action to electoral consequences, the entire balance of power shifts back to us. Not in Washington, D.C., but in the states. This isn't about being angry. This is about being effective. We don't change the direction of the country by screaming at institutions designed to ignore us. We change it by applying pressure where it actually moves something. We lift where we stand. And right now, where we stand matters. This window, it doesn't stay open forever. Legislative sessions end, campaigns move on, and attention shifts elsewhere. But right now, this is the moment. And the fact that some very powerful people are starting to panic should tell you everything you need to know. We are closer than they want you to believe. If you want proof of that, you don't have to look to Washington, D.C. You don't have to wait for another election cycle. You can look at what's already happened this year. In New Hampshire, Defend the Guard has already passed the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed, nay? No. The ayes have it, and the motion's adopted.
The New Hampshire House passed a new version of the Defend the Guard Act Thursday afternoon.
And that didn't happen by accident. It happened because of disciplined state-level work. It happened because of a strong bill sponsor, Representative Tom Mannion. It happened because of serious grassroots muscles from the Free State Project. Activists who understand timing, process, and pressure. You see, that's the model, folks. And now the next battlefield has already presented itself in Arizona. And this may actually be the most winnable fight we have this year. In Arizona, Defend the Guard is being led by Air Force veteran and Lieutenant Colonel Wendy Rogers. This bill is now before the Senate Military Affairs and Border Security Committee, chaired by Senator David Gowan. And this is where everything we just talked about becomes real. That committee includes Senators Tim Dunn, Sally Ann Gonzalez, Catherine Miranda, Kiana Sears, Janae Shamp, and our bill sponsor, the great Wendy Rogers herself. The hearing is scheduled for Monday, February 16th at 1:30 p.m. You see, we don't have to convince an entire state of voters the value of Defend the Guard. We have to convince 7 committee members. 7. You think your power of influence is multiplied over 750,000 citizens with your U.S. representative? Over 7 senators in the Arizona legislature. Think about it for a second. The date matters, folks. Monday, February 16th, because this is the moment when a very small amount of citizen effort can have an outsized multiplied impact. This is not about rallies. This is not about protests. This is not about hanging a sign off of a freeway overpass. This is not about screaming on social media. This is about targeted, disciplined civic pressure at exactly the right point and at exactly the right time. Our Director of Field Operations, Diego Rivera, is leading a team of activists and volunteers to do one simple thing: make phone calls into the committee members' offices. 15 minutes of your time during your lunch break over the next week. That's it. Each call is no longer than 30 seconds. There's no confrontation. There's no arguing. This is simply citizens expressing their support for Defend the Guard and asking their elected officials to vote yes in committee. That may not sound dramatic, but let me tell you, it works. This is how we've had tremendous influence in committee rooms across the country. This is how we go into votes knowing exactly what the numbers are. And this is how bills move. If you go to defendtheguard.us/phone bank and sign up, Diego will reach out with one simple call script and instructions on who to call and when. You don't need experience. You don't need talking points. You just need a phone and a few minutes of your time. And once this bill passes out of the committee, which we're confident that will, Senator Rogers will lead it to the floor of the Arizona Senate. And that's where we multiply our impact again. At that point, we may ask you to increase your effort from one day of 15 minutes to maybe 5 days over a week's period of time. We'll give you a short list of senators who are movable. They're not guaranteed votes, but we know that they are persuadable. And this is how we change outcomes. We don't guess. We don't hope. We just do the work. And if you can't participate in the phone bank, you can still help. $25, $50, or $100 goes directly to supporting this effort. That's another way to multiply your influence. This is citizen pressure applied where it actually matters. Now, here's why all of this is important to understand, because before we talk about Washington, D.C., we need to kind of get a picture of the lay of the land, because when state level efforts like this start succeeding, the people who have controlled foreign policy for decades start to get nervous. When states begin asserting themselves, when National Guard manpower is no longer guaranteed, when the machinery of endless war starts to jam, that's when the donor class leans in. Very quietly at first, but they're there. Which brings us to a familiar name you probably didn't expect to hear again anytime soon. Jeb Bush. You remember Jeb Bush, right? When running for president, he once had to beg an audience to please clap
I think the next president needs to be a lot quieter, but send a signal that we're prepared to act in the national security interests of this country to get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
This week marked the 10-year anniversary of that moment, which is funny, but it's also revealing because Jeb Bush was never just a bad candidate. He was the last serious attempt to convince Republican voters that the Bush era wasn't a catastrophic mistake. This was the man who campaigned on the belief that his brother, George W. Bush, was the greatest president in American history. The man who continued to defend the invasion of Iraq long after even Washington stopped pretending that it had worked. And Jeb was the man who managed to burn through more than $100 million to win less than 1% of the Republican electorate. A truly historic, massive failure on the return on investment. But like a bad sequel that nobody asked for, Jeb Bush is back, and he keeps finding his way back into the frame. Recently, he showed his face at a fancy Washington, D.C. donor dinner. And when asked about Jeb being there, Donald Trump said that Jeb has been very nice to me lately, but he didn't know why or what had happened. Well, what had happened is actually very simple, because in 2024, Jeb Bush became the chairman of United Against Nuclear Iran. President Trump's been very friendly to that organization, obviously. That organization exists for one purpose: to push the United States towards confrontation and regime change with Iran. It was founded in the late Bush-era moment when neoconservatives still believed that they could permanently run American foreign policy without any meaningful resistance. So, Mr. President, the reason Jeb Bush is being so kind to you is because you've been returning the favor. So when Jeb Bush suddenly reappears, smiling, praising, and hovering close to power, it's not because he has personal growth. This is called brand management. The Bush family has never met a war they didn't think somebody else's children should fight. And that brings us to the part of the United Against Nuclear Iran that people really don't talk enough about and probably don't know anything about. Because Jeb Bush is not the most revealing name on that organization's leadership roster. That would be somebody named Zohar Palti. Palti is a former senior intelligence official in Israel. He was a major player inside of the Israeli Mossad, and he spent his career inside of foreign intelligence and national security. And now he sits inside an organization explicitly designed to pressure the United States towards war with Iran. I want you to sit on that for a second. Let that fester. An unelected, non-American, foreign intelligence official helping shape American war policy by leveraging the name and recognition of the brother of an American president who lied us into decades of undeclared wars across the Middle East, while American National Guard units are the ones who will deploy, American families are the ones who would absorb the cost, and American communities are the ones left dealing with the aftermath. That's not federalism. That's not representative government. And it's certainly not accountability. And it most definitely is not America first. This is exactly the kind of influence that thrives when decisions are centralized in Washington, D.C., when they're opaque, when they're disconnected from the people who pay the price. And Jeb Bush is the perfect frontman for it. He's polite. He's familiar. He's affable. He speaks the language of the donors. And he carries the last name that once convinced Washington it could invade a country, break it, and call it democracy. But here's the problem for Jeb and his friends. That system is being challenged. Not by the think tanks in DC, not by op-eds written by powerful people, but by state legislatures asserting themselves and cutting off the assumption that manpower is unlimited and free. You think Jeb Bush supports Defend the Guard? If you do, I've got oceanfront property in Phoenix with your name on it. Because Defend the Guard doesn't just threaten bad policy, it threatens an entire business model. And when quiet influence stops working, when smiling at dinners isn't enough for politicians anymore, and when the panic stops being subtle, that's when it spills onto network television. And that's how you end up with a senior United States senator begging for $10 donations on Fox News. Which brings us to one of the great drunk villains of our lifetime, Lindsey Graham. And I want to be clear up front. I don't like this man. I don't respect him. And I think the country would be measurably better off if he were no longer anywhere near a position of influence. It's not personal. Never met the guy. It's just a resume review. I just look at what he's done and what he said. Lindsey Graham has been wrong about virtually every major foreign policy decision of the last quarter century. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Iran. Pick one. Pick a war. And odds are that Lindsey Graham was out in front of it, chest puffed out, daring somebody else's kids to go and fight it. This is the man who once joked that they were cutting your taxes and killing all the right people.
So I just want to say, I feel good about the Republican Party. I feel good about where we're going as a nation. We're killing all the right people and we're cutting your taxes. Trump is my favorite president. We've run out of bombs. We didn't run out of bombs in World War II.
That one line tells you everything that you need to know about the dainty Lindsey Graham and how he thinks. War is just a punchline delivered after his 10th mint julep of the night. Violence is abstract. The human cost is somebody else's problem because Lindsey doesn't have children to fight in these wars. But it didn't stop there. Over the last several years, Lindsey Graham has acted like a one-man hype squad for the war in Ukraine. He's praised Zelensky like he's some sort of Marvel action hero. He's gone on television daring the United States to send more money, more weapons, more equipment, more everything. Billions of dollars, no declared war, no defined objective, no end state. Just send it. It's always easy to be brave with other people's money. It's always easy to be bold with other people's sons and daughters. Once again, Lindsey has none. No sons, no daughters. No one to bear his name. No one to be embarrassed by his legacy. And if Ukraine wasn't enough, Lindsey Graham has spent years openly encouraging confrontation with Iran, not restraint, not diplomacy, not congressional debate, just war. He talks about it casually, recklessly, like it's a game of risk instead of a decision that gets Americans killed. Different countries, same mindset. Lindsey Graham believes that American power exists to be projected endlessly without limits, without declarations, and without accountability. He believes there will always be another unit to deploy, another check to write, another emergency to invoke. And for the longest time, he was right because nobody dared to stop it. But talk about the part that the delicate Lindsey Graham never talks about. The American National Guard. Not long ago, the National Guard from South Carolina had service members who were in Syria and they were killed. Guardsmen, citizen soldiers, men and women from the low country of South Carolina, men who had day jobs, families, communities that expected them to come home. They weren't defending South Carolina. They weren't responding to an attack on the United States. They weren't fighting in a war that Congress ever declared or even authorized. They were there because Washington treats the National Guard like a federal spare parts bin. They were there to be tripwires. And Lindsey Graham has been one of the loudest voices defending that arrangement. When guardsmen die in undeclared war, Lindsey Graham doesn't demand accountability. He doesn't ask why Congress didn't vote. He doesn't ask why states weren't consulted. He demands escalation. More money, more weapons, more involvement, more war. And he says it like the manpower is infinite. But here's the thing, Lindsey. Those guard members had names. They had families. And those families never got accountability, and they never got a vote. That silence, that refusal to explain why Americans were in harm's way without consent tells you everything you need to know about Lindsey Graham. Now, fast forward to last week. This is where it gets fun. Lindsey Graham goes on Fox News, not to make a case for war, but to beg for your money. Pray for us, he says. Volunteer for us, he says. But please give us more money. Check it out.
How can you help? You can pray. If the Republican Party is wrong with God, no amount of money will help us. You can volunteer. You can make phone calls. You can knock on doors. But you can give. I've been outraised twice in the last 2 quarters. They're killing us money-wise. I'd rather have $10 from 1 million people than one guy give me $10 million. Please go to lindseygraham.com tonight and give what you can and do it every month until the election. There are millions of people watching. If you can give $10, $20, whatever you and give, I'm going to take half that money and give it to my fellow Republicans to hold the Senate. If we hold the Senate, we get judges through. If we have the Senate, I'll be Judiciary Chairman in 27, and we'll get the train running again for judges. LindseyGraham.com. You can pray, you can volunteer, but please give. We're getting wiped out financially. I don't know where the hell all this money is coming from, but everybody out there, if you can help tonight. The money goes to a good cause. It's going to save our country. God bless Donald Trump. We're not backing up. We're going to be rational. We're going to work to turn down the temperature, but we're not going back to Biden policies.
$10, $20, whatever you can spare. He tells millions of viewers they're getting wiped out financially, that he'd rather have $10 from a million people than one guy giving 10 million, which is actually rich, coming from the man who has spent his entire career swimming in donor cash tied to defense lobbies and foreign policy interests. Then comes the real tell. He promises to funnel half of the money to Senate Republicans so that he can be Judiciary Committee chairman and to get that train running on judges. Why aren't you doing your job now, Lindsey? In other words, he wants you to give him money so that he can keep his power. This wasn't leadership. This wasn't strength. This was panic. This was petulism. Because the system that protected Lindsey Graham for decades is under stress. When state legislatures assert themselves, when National Guard deployments are no longer automatic, when wars require actual votes and real political risk, men like Lindsey Graham stop looking confident and they start looking desperate. Nothing would do more good for this country than watching Lindsey Graham lose an election and fade into irrelevance. Not out of spite, but because it would send a message that endless war is no longer a safe career path. And that, folks, is the through line of this entire episode. What happened in New Hampshire mattered. What's going to happen in Arizona next week matters. Defend the Guard passing in every state matters, and state legislatures, they matter. Because when citizens apply pressure where it actually works, even the loudest warmongers start to sweat. And watching that happen isn't just satisfying. It's the entire point of our organization. And this is where we land the plane for today. After everything you just heard, the takeaway is not outrage. It's not personal insults. It's opportunity. Because while men like Lindsey Graham are panicking on television, while Jeb Bush is reasserting himself in the donor networks, and these donor networks are scrambling behind closed doors, while old assumptions about endless war are starting to crack, there's something very simple happening on the ground. Regular citizens are showing up in state legislatures and forcing accountability back into the system. That's what Arizona represents right now. And on Monday, February 16th at 1:30 p.m., Defend the Guard will be heard in Arizona Senate Military Affairs and Border Security Committee. And again, it's not symbolic. It's real. That's the point in the process where pressure actually works and actually matters. This is the moment where 15 minutes of your time can do more to shape U.S. foreign policy than years of arguing with people in Washington who will never, ever listen to you. You don't need permission, folks. You don't need credentials. You don't need to be an expert. You have this authority by your birthright as American citizens. It was given to you by God, by the Creator. You just need to act where your voice still counts. If you go to defendtheguard.us/phone bank, our team will give you a simple script and a short list of calls. Each one takes about 30 seconds. No confrontation, no drama, just citizens telling their elected officials where they stand. This is how we pass Defend the Guard in New Hampshire. This is how we will move it in Arizona. This is how we keep pushing it across the country. And if you can't make calls, you can still help. $25, $50, or $100 directly supports this effort and keeps our field operations moving in states where the margin is thin and the stakes are very, very high. This is not about being loud. This is about being effective. The people you heard about in this episode built their power on the assumption that Americans would stay disengaged, frustrated, and focused on the wrong battlefield. Arizona and New Hampshire, they prove that that assumption is wrong. The states are moving, the leverage is shifting, and the panic you're seeing is real. We are closer now than they want you to believe. And now it's time to act like it. Thanks for being here with us on the Bring Our Troops Home podcast. Please check us out on all the socials at Troops Home US or on our website, bringourtroopshome.us or defendtheguard.us, and we will see you on the next episode.